Good morning, skeptical attendees. I am super excited to introduce our next speaker. As skeptics, we draw on scientific knowledge, logic, and reasoned arguments to combat pseudoscience, to debunk claims of the paranormal, and to pull back the curtain on New Age fraudsters and psychic scammers. If we think of science, logic, and reason as skeptic superpowers, our next guest is someone I think of as a real skeptic superhero. He's a lawyer whose skeptic superpowers include his expert knowledge of the law and the courts. And as the legal director for Center for Inquiry in Washington, D.C. since 2013, he's been leading CFI's legal challenges against some of the biggest peddlers of pseudoscientific products. Most notably, a case many of you are familiar with, CFI versus Walmart and CVS, which relates to those retailers' sale of homeopathic products. Also, CFI versus Boiron, one of the largest manufacturers of homeopathic products in the world. He's originally from the UK. His undergrad studies were at Oxford and his master's at University of Warwick before coming to the US, where he received his law degree from Vanderbilt University. Here to talk with us today about pseudoscience and the law, please join me in welcoming Nick Little. Good morning, Nick, or good afternoon to you from Washington, D.C. Thank you so much for being here today. And with that, I turn it over to you, sir.
Thank you. Thank you, Jill. Yes, I'm actually located in Charlottesville, Virginia. I have an office up in DC, and since COVID, I have not been seeing much of that office, but it's the wonder of the internet and everything is how we can move forward. So I very much appreciate those kind words, and I love speaking to the skeptics side of the movement just because it's part of the community that I feel in our legal work has received very short shrift over the years, and I kind of want to apologize for that. So what I'm going to try and do today, as you can see, I'm talking about the interaction of pseudoscience and the law. And in particular, I'm posing the questions that I think we've all asked is, why doesn't the government do anything about this? And what I'm going to do is I'm going to talk a little bit generally and then talk more specifically about my work on homeopathy and then kind of backtrack it to be a little more general. And hopefully it open it up for some questions about, why are we specifically targeting homeopathy? What are the opportunities for legal work in other areas? So here we are. As it was mentioned, I run the Center for Inquiry's legal program. For the longest time, I was their only lawyer. I have a junior lawyer under me, which is great. We can honestly say we have doubled the size of the department and moving on to do more things. So little bit of a background on CFI for those who don't know it. We're actually made up of three constituent parts. The first part is the Committee for Skeptical Inquiry, CSI, the publisher of Skeptical Inquirer magazine that I'm sure all of you read, that you know about, and that's great. That's kind of the everything from Bigfoot through chupacabras to psychics to alternative medicine. Then we have the Council for Secular Humanism, CSH, which is what I like to refer to as the God part of my job. First Amendment law. It's the separation of church and state and the promotion of secular humanism in that. And then third, we have the Richard Dawkins Foundation for Reason and Science, which we merged with the RDF just after I joined, in fact, and that has brought a series of programs over to us, openly secular, trying to get famous people and non-famous people to admit publicly their lack of religious belief. TIES, the Teacher Institute of Evolutionary Science, which provides materials for grade school and middle school teachers to teach evolution in there, and more recently the Science Saves program, trying to increase the public awareness of science and what it has done for us as a community. I handle all three of these in the legal department, and that means both the inside and the outside work. And when I joined, the outside work was predominantly Council for Secular Humanism. It was, if you look at it, this traditional church-state work. And by that, I mean the cases that I'm sure you've all seen in there. It's, war memorials, when you put like a big cross up on public land and claim it's a war memorial, or when you're praying in school, public schools, maybe even at football games, maybe even the coaches at football games. And then more generally, school funding work. So the idea that taxpayer money should only go to secular public education in that. I also, though, did something which some of the other humanist groups can't do. I was looking at those instances where religion and science and the law intermingle. And so we've seen cases in that in the abortion area, because so much of the opposition to abortion, however much it claims to be scientific based, we can see it's just purely a religious morality involved. Key area of this, LGBTQ rights on this. Again, the opposition to this, to say same-sex marriage being legalized, was very heartfelt, but it was fundamentally a religious opposition. And that just simply doesn't cut the mustard in a secular society. Talking about evolution in schools, one of the few areas we're actually being successful recently in preventing creationism being taught in schools. Also, you then see it in sex ed classes and some of the, frankly, ridiculous, completely unfounded, unscientific sex ed classes that are taught in some of our school systems with the abstinence programs. But over the years, and I realize I've been at CFI almost 9 years now, we've seen some pretty dramatic changes in the legal environment. And I pick the cases I talked about, I picked for a reason, because, we can see what's changed here. I joined CFI and abortion was a constitutional right across the country. It's not now. Prayer in schools. We saw a football coach now being told he's allowed to pray after games on the 50-yard line in front of, with the team and the audience there. We recently lost a big school funding case, war memorial cases. I mentioned that there's the Bladensburg Cross in Maryland, a 40-foot concrete Christian cross displayed on public land. And according to the Supreme Court, that's not a religious symbol. And if that's not, I don't know what is a religious symbol. So what we've attempted to do in response to that is we started to look on how can we change our focus. And in particular, how can we start, I call it suing for science. How can we start using the legal framework to defend science, to defend skepticism on this? And this is something we haven't really done in the past, either at CFI or as a movement generally. And part of that is because you skeptics tend to be nice. You tend to be good. And us lawyers, we are not nice people. In fact, we all these polls show we're some of the least respected people out there, and that's fine, because what we do is combative on it. And scientists, for too long, in my view, have sat back and thought that being right is enough. And unfortunately, what we're seeing across society with the growth of pseudoscience and the spread of pseudoscience is being right just isn't enough anymore. We need to go further. So what is pseudoscience? This is a slide I normally spend an awful lot of time on, but I don't need to here. I'm preaching to the choir on this, and that's great. The thing I like to look at in pseudoscience in particular is its role, that it takes advantage of science. It tries to dress itself up as science in order to get the respectability of science, but isn't actually scientific at all. And we go back to what the scientific method is, and I'm sure you heard before me, you've been hearing about the scientific method, you'll hear afterwards. This is something we hold. If there is holy writ in the skeptic movement, it's that the scientific method is important and needs to be followed. The notion of, you observe things, you form a hypothesis, you test that hypothesis, you develop a theory, and you constantly try to disprove that. What does pseudoscience do? It reverses that. It puts the cart before the horse in this. It comes with a theory. It believes it has the answer, and then it cherry picks to try to justify that. And, we've seen that all across there. I mean, and it's the notion that they are attempting to do is to create a controversy when there isn't actually a controversy. So all these different methods, you use mercenary scientists, cherry pick data and manipulated methods, promote doubt and uncertainty, use rhetoric in this. So what area is this? Abortion is a classic example of this. I wrote an entire brief for the Supreme Court about Dr. Vincent Rue, who is the pseudoscientist who does so much of the abortion work, with his claim of he invented this notion of post-abortion syndrome, the idea that women who have abortions end up having mental health problems afterwards. Complete nonsense. But the idea is once you get one thing published, you turn around and you point to this and say, well, there's at least a controversy out there. Vaccination and mask mandates and COVID generally. We all saw this notion of this promotion of doubt and uncertainty. It's turning science against itself, because when science turns around and says, hey, you know what, we were wrong in the past, we've got more data, now this is what we believe, the pseudoscientists turn around and point and say, see, you were wrong, why should we believe you now? Again, global climate change is a classic in this, because they can find one or two scientists, presumably who get nice paychecks from the Koch brothers and the oil companies, who say there is no anthropomorphic climate change. That doesn't mean it's true, but it's enough for them to demand they get their viewpoint across. And groups like Fox News, of course, is very willing to help on that. So that's what we're facing in pseudoscience. Why did I choose homeopathy to go after? Well, I like to describe homeopathy as the Scientology of pseudoscience. Like all religions out there have things you can point at and make fun of them. They all have some things which, kind of crazy, we might like to say. And that's true of all pseudoscience. But Scientology, especially, I don't know if you've seen the South Park episode on the details of Scientology or any of the documentaries. Scientology is really dumb. And homeopathy is the Scientology of pseudoscience. I picked homeopathy because it's really, really, really bullshit. Of all the bullshit out there, homeopathy is the bullshittiest. I'm not even sure if that's a word, but it is now. So, quick brief on what homeopathy is, for those who don't know. Homeopathy is a type of alternative medicine, and unfortunately, most people out there don't seem to understand what it is. When I told people that I was suing about homeopathy, I was getting messages from friends which were like, Nick, I agree with what you do, but why are you trying to take my St. John's wort away from me, or my my supplements. And that's not it. That's not homeopathy. Homeopathy isn't herbal medicine. It's a very specific part of alternative medicine, which relies on they call them laws. I'm not willing to call them laws because they're nonsense, but I'm using law in scare quotes, and it should scare people. The first is the law of similars. This can be defined as like treats like. If something causes a symptom, you can use that to treat a symptom. It's clearly nonsense. It was developed before people knew about the germ theory of disease and things. We don't, for example, think that if somebody's got a bullet wound, the last thing they need is to be shot multiple times again. But this is what they believe, like cause like. And this Dr. Hahnemann, who founded homeopathy, believed that all chronic diseases came back to one of three miasms. So this shows you what you're dealing with. And those three miasms were gonorrhea, syphilis, and the psoric miasm, which is the itch. It's, if you go back and read his stuff, it's this obsession with sex and venereal disease on it. Hey, but it's this idea that like causes like. So if something's bad for you, just treat somebody with that. Now, there's obviously a major problem on this, which is like you're giving people things that harm them. Don't worry, the homeopaths say. What we do is we dilute it down. Law of infinitesimal doses, and the more we dilute it, the stronger it gets. So a 1C dilution is you have 1 part of the active ingredient to 100 parts of water. That's 1C. Then if you do it again to 2C, what you do is you take 1 part of that solution and dilute it with 100 parts more water. So anyone who knows math can see where this is going. This is getting exponentially problematic in it. You get to a point, and I apologize, I forgot the exact point. I think it's about 10 to the power of 28 or 30 or so, where there's nothing left. It's an impossibility. You've got no active ingredient left in your thing. What happens there? Well, again, the homeopaths have got an excuse here. They've got a justification. And what they say is if in between each dilution you succuss the substance, and what that means is, I kid you not, you strike it against an elastic surface such as the cover of a leather-clad book. That's succussion, and that means each time you dilute it, it gets stronger up to the point that acylcoccinum, which I've listed there, which is a 200C dilution, which means the active ingredient, which is the heart and liver of a particular type of duck. What this has to do with flu, I don't know, but according to the homeopaths, it does. And then it's 1 part of that to 10 to the 400 parts of water. To give you an idea of just how ridiculous that is, most estimates are that there are 10 to, I believe it's 10 to the power of 80 atoms in the known universe. So this is 320 times that in size. It's an astonishing number. How can this possibly have any kind of impact? The homeopaths come back. Water memory. Water remembers what is dissolved in it. So you see what I mean in that homeopathy is the Scientology of pseudoscience. It's complete nonsense, but it's nonsense that sells, I believe it's $5.7 billion, sorry, $5.4 billion a year in the world. That's a lot of nonsense out there. It's also nonsense that you see on the shelves of retail pharmacists. People think, we've done survey work on this, people assume that because it is displayed on a shelf, there must be something to it. There's no sign when you pick up the box, when you pick it up, that this is completely bogus, but yet here we go. So, to get to the legal side, why do we protect consumers? What's the point of it? Why don't we rely on the free market for this? You'll see a lot of people turning around and claiming, and I don't want to get this political, that the government shouldn't be involved in this. This is just about, sort of like caveat emptor on this, let the buyer beware. The problem with free market regulation here is that even if it works perfectly, it's retroactive because people have to be ripped off before they can do anything. And when you're starting to talk about medicine and treating disease, that's going to kill people. You will get people made sick and you will get people who die. In fact, if you go back and look at it, it's really this lack of regulation that caused homeopathy in the first place. When you had unregulated doctors, doctors very often did more harm than good. So the homeopaths would come along, and at least the water that they were giving you with no active ingredients left was pure water and wasn't killing you. So you've got a situation where we accept that there's a need for consumer protection. Part of this is, and in particular when we're talking about alternative medicine, people need information in this, and there's an information imbalance. And that information imbalance is huge. Consumers have far less information than retailers and manufacturers on it. So we need the government to step in and provide that degree of consumer protection in here. What we're seeing, information problems in three specific ways. Firstly, there's just more information out there than there's ever been before, and people don't have the ability to judge what is good information and what is bad information. There's also a massive growth in we can blame the internet largely for this, in both misinformation and in disinformation on this. It is something that this is too important just to leave to the free market. If we do that, people are going to get hurt, people are going to die. Back to the snake oil days. So, what is the government's role in this? How can they protect us? Well, the first thing they can do is they can pass legislation. They can regulate in this. They create the framework in which the market operates. So they can decide what you're allowed to sell, how it can be made, how it can be marketed. These are the requirements that you have to have safe manufacturing plants on this. You can't run TV ads saying this will cure everything. Government can litigate to enforce its rules. It can punish wrongdoers, and it can also stop errors before they happen. It can send inspectors into plants on this to check things. And also the government has a role in education. In the end, we are going to have to protect ourselves from pseudoscience, and education is the best way we can do that. We need to be taught through our school system that science is real, science matters, that just because someone is telling you something will cure you, if, like homeopathy, there's literally nothing in there, then maybe you should look twice about it. So this is the ideal. This is what we hope the government will do. How do they do it? Well, agencies, government agencies. These have spread into every single part of our life. The Food and Drug Administration deals with, not surprisingly, food and drugs in it. I mean, huge impact across the board. Then you got the Federal Trade Commission, which handles how medical products are marketed? What can they say? It's also got a very important role, along with the Department of Justice, in antitrust enforcement. And I would love that. That's my old area of law. And it's shocking when you see the level of concentration that has happened in the food industry and the drug industry, in all of the vital industries. We saw this with baby formula. Reason there was a shortage is there's only 4 corporations that produce it left in America, and one of those had to shut down a major factory. Got the EPA, the Environmental Protection Agency, brought to us, and it shows how politics has changed. Richard Nixon's administration started the EPA. I don't think we could imagine the Trump administration doing that, but hey, there we go. But the USDA, that U.S. Department of Agriculture, your foodstuffs, grades your beef is where I come across it most. So you've got all these regulations put out by these groups that meant to be covered all of these things. But here's the problem. How can you make the government either pass a new regulation or, more importantly, enforce the regulations that are already on the books? Real problem is you can't. How do we generally get people to do what they said they're going to do? We sue them. It's the American way. But you can't sue the government, really. I mean, there are very rare situations where you can sue the government. And in particular, you can't sue an agency for not doing its job well enough. So the FDA can pass a rule, but if they don't enforce that, there's literally nothing you can do to make them enforce a rule through the legal system. And the idea of this is that we do have a method, in theory, of making the government do what we want, and that's elections, that's democracy. Unfortunately, when you come down to things like regulations on homeopathy, that's unlikely to be an important factor in any election. You just have to realize that. I am not going to convince people to vote for Joe Biden over Donald Trump because Joe Biden has a better approach to regulating acylcococcus. Some would argue this is actually baked into our system. Our democratic system is designed to be inefficient because if it's inefficient, it can do less harm. That's probably true, but on the other hand, it can also do an awful lot less good. So let's focus in now on the regulation of homeopathy. How is homeopathy regulated? Well, there's a government framework established here. And this goes back to the 1938 Federal Food, Drug, and Cosmetic Act. Just before the war, just before the war for some of us. Some of you guys apparently were a few years late on this, but just before the war, tail end of New Deal programs, this idea that there was belief that the federal government could help people. And so it put food, drug, and cosmetics under the regulation of the government and the department, the FDA. It defines what drugs can be sold, what they can be sold for, both prescription drugs and over-the-counter drugs. What it did, and it's fascinating how this happened, and I really don't have time to go into it, but suffice to say, one of the chief senators involved in this was a retired homeopathic doctor. And they put in that the homeopathic pharmacopoeia of the United States, or as I like to call it, the big bumper book of homeopathy, this huge book that lists every homeopathic treatment, this was classified as an official compendium of drugs. So anything that was listed in it was a drug according to the FDA, which meant that they could regulate it. The FDA then develops this process whereby, if you are bringing a new drug to market, you need to get approval on it. What does that mean for over-the-counter stuff? Well, most over-the-counter stuff isn't new drugs. It comes out, for example, ibuprofen has gone through this whole process. So if you want to bring out a new ibuprofen tablet, you can do that under the fact that it's already been approved, because that's the drug there. But basically, what you need to do to get a new drug approved is to show it is safe and it is effective. In other words, that it does what it says and it won't kill you or make you sicker. And this talks on how the drug is formulated, how it's manufactured, how it's labeled. It goes through the whole process. How does this, though, apply to homeopathy on it? Because really, from 1938 until the 1980s, no one really cared about homeopathy because no one bought homeopathy. It really wasn't present in the marketplace until I'm trying to think of the best way to describe this. We could track it with, the growth of New Age, Big Pharma is out to kill us, all this, and homeopathy is then rediscovered and it starts becoming big business. As I mentioned, in 2017, $5.4 billion were sold worldwide in this. So you've got this growth in America, and we come around, the FDA finally takes notice. In 1988, they put out what is called CPG 400.400, Compliance Policy Guide. This is titled The Conditions Under Which Homeopathic Drugs May Be Marketed. Gives broad discretion to the FDA to target what it wants. Unfortunately, this was treated by the industry as there was no regulation whatsoever. They could do whatever they wanted. And unfortunately, the FDA kind of let them do it. Went along till 2019, 400 was revoked, and it's been replaced by what we call a risk-based replacement approach. So in that, what that recognizes is, in theory, and it hasn't been finalized yet. I know it's 3 years ago, but the government takes a long time to finalize this. In theory, what they're saying is that there is no safe harbor for homeopathic drugs, that any drug that is unapproved, which is all homeopathic drugs, is being marketed illegally and is subject to FDA enforcement at any time. So what that means is they cannot make any claims about anything unless they can back it up with science. Clearly, they can't back it up with science because, as we all know, homeopathy is bullshit. So they have no scientific back. Of course, though, we're not getting the FDA going in and like, I'm thinking of the Untouchables here with when you've got prohibition busting speakeasies, where they're not going to run into CVS and rip homeopathy off shelves. They say they're going to prioritize this into the most risky. Those are things that have already caused injuries, that have dangerous ingredients, injectables that deal with either fatal or serious diseases. When you see homeopathic cancer treatments, I get really angry, or that are targeted against a vulnerable population on this, the elderly, children, whatever. Unfortunately, as I've said, this hasn't come in yet. We're seeing which way this goes. But there's a problem with consumer protection law on this, and there's a problem with homeopathic regulations on this. You've got differences between state and federal law, and that's something, again, that we could go in for ages. As I mentioned, there's a problem of how do you make the government do its job. You can't sue them. It's fine that they pass these laws, these regulations, but what if they don't enforce them? And the bottom line is, as we've seen across the board, the system is fundamentally broken. What you have is regulatory capture. The people who have most influence over the FDA are the people who have most money at stake. That's not consumers. So what's the reality? As I kind of like gave this away a little bit, when I said that these rules aren't really enforced. So we look at this. I'm just going to give you one example out of CPG 400-400, which was this. This was a requirement that basically by June the 11th, 1990, the industry had to have English language names for the ingredients rather than just Latin. Tell you what, go into any supermarket now, go into any homeopathic product. This has never been done. It's never been enforced. It's been blatantly ignored by the industry, but it's also been ignored by the government. I found this online. This fascinates me. Homeopathic house call. It's like concierge medicine, but for bullshit made up stuff. It's fascinating. You can pay, I think it's $12 a month to have a homeopath on call. And this then tells you what is homeopathy. Uses safe, non-toxic doses of natural substances, blah, blah, blah. It's a 200-year-old system of healing that has proven to be effective. Then you go through 3 menus to get to the disclaimer. Homeopathic house call is not intended to replace qualified medical attention. Nothing contained in homeopathic house call is intended to make diagnoses, prescriptions, or recommended treatments. So on the one hand, you have this rule, you can't say these things, and they put these nice disclaimers up, but they use the disclaimers in small print, and then they make their claims in huge, big, bold color pictures. The FTC in November 2016 came out with a wonderful requirement that unless there is competent and reliable scientific evidence to substantiate a claim, and remember, with homeopathy, there is no competent and reliable scientific evidence. Homeopathic products need to effectively communicate that there's no scientific evidence the product works and that it's based on theories from the 1700s. Again, has anyone seen this on this? This is November 2016. This is almost 6 years ago, and I've not seen a single example of this. So back to the original question. Why doesn't the government stop the charlatans, in particular the homeopathic ones? They can't. They don't have the ability. They don't have the funding to do this. They don't have the capacity to do this. They don't want to, as a slightly more cynical way of looking at it, but there's an absence of will to do anything. And in particular with homeopathy, there's an absence of will because it's sugar pills, it's water. They don't care because no one's getting hurt, except people are getting hurt. Also, they've got a whole lot of other priorities. So that opens the door for us in the nonprofit community. And we've seen this. We go back to the 60s and 70s. You saw huge movements for environmentalism, for consumer safety. Did they get all of their goals? No, but they at least got some of them. There are problems with litigation, though, as a nonprofit. First of these is law does science really, really badly. We are terrible at science. And I mentioned that partially before, because science is about being right. In the legal system, we have an adversarial system in the country. We're not about truth. We're about persuasion on this. Who are we trying to persuade? We're trying to persuade a judiciary. Who becomes judges? Well, I'll give you a clue. Scientists don't become lawyers. And if they're not becoming lawyers, they're not becoming judges. I have never seen a judge with any kind, even an undergraduate science background. So let alone somebody who can understand the intricacies. Then you got the jury system. Juries make the final decision. The Constitution guarantees it. Any federal case that more than $20 is at stake, you have a right to a jury. Who sits on a jury? It's not a bunch of scientists sitting on a jury. Again, the cynic in me can turn around and say the jury is 12 people who weren't good enough to get disqualified from serving on the jury. but it's not a place for the trying of scientific fact. Who does science in courts? Expert witnesses. And I'm sure some of you listening have been expert witnesses. I've written expert reports. I've told you I'm not a scientist, but I've written reports for scientists who sign their name on them. The system is not good, but it's what we've got. So how do we do it? How do we bring a suit? Well, the first thing we need is jurisdiction. There's two parts of that. You need subject matter jurisdiction. In other words, the law has to cover what you're suing about, and geographical jurisdiction. So the law has to apply in that area. And then here's the key thing. You have to have standing. I don't know if that's a term that many people outside of the legal profession know. I describe it as skin in the game. You can't bring a hypothetical lawsuit. You have to have been harmed in this. And this was our big problem with suing on homeopathy. How do you show harm on this? Well, we could find someone who bought homeopathy. But you know what? They don't tend to be CFI members on this. As an organization, because we know homeopathy is nonsense, we haven't been hurt by it. So let's take a step back. What harm does homeopathy cause? Well, I maintain there are three types of harm on this. There's the direct injury. People, and there were cases with children taking teething tablets that had too much belladonna in them, deadly nightshade. Those people, on the other hand, they're going to go to the plaintiff's bar and sue for millions of dollars. We're not going to be able to represent those. But the two types we can is those who have opportunity cost and those who suffer financial harm. Financial harm's clear. If you buy $20 package of acylcoconum, you might just as well have flushed that $20 down the toilet. You are being subject to financial fraud for that $20, but you're also suffering an opportunity cost. What is that cost? The cost is you're suffering from the flu longer than you would do if you'd taken real medicine. And so you've got a cost on that. So how do we get standing? Because it wasn't us. It's not our members. Fortunately, the District of Columbia, where our executive office is, their consumer protection statute allows nonprofits to sue on behalf of the general public. That's where we are. Who do we sue? As you've heard, we sued CVS and Walmart. What's our theory there? Well, if you walk into your CVS, they have all these signs on there. You'll have like pain relief, you'll have cold and flu, and then underneath that, it's products to be sold on that. They will have Arnica cream, homeopathic, next to ibuprofen. Ibuprofen works, it relieves pain. By doing that, they are saying that Arnica also relieves pain, and it doesn't, so they are defrauding people. I can go into more details of that in questions if anyone has. Our theories against Boiron, the manufacturer, are a little different. What we're trying to do there is we're turning around and saying, you sell all these different products and you claim it's for all these different diseases. Each product is for a disease, but when we test them, these are all identical. So by saying that they cure different things, you're telling people they have to buy multiple products rather than just one, and that's fraudulent. We're also, because we decided the biggest retailer in the world, the biggest pharmacy chain in the United States, and the biggest homeopathic manufacturer in the world wasn't enough, we decided to add on, we're suing the federal government. We're suing them under the Freedom of Information Act because you cannot see this homeopathic pharmacopoeia of the United States unless you pay $20,000 a year to see it. If this book defines what homeopathic drugs are, we should be allowed to sue it. So we're suing the federal government for that. To wrap up, where are we now? Well, we lost our case against both CVS and Walmart in the DC trial court. They said we didn't have standing, that the law didn't cover us. We've appealed that. We've had oral arguments at the DC Court of Appeals. I think we won that. We're just waiting on a decision. It's clear the law was written to help us. The Boiron case is really new. This is not a case that there's going to be any chance of settlement on because, as Boiron's lawyer says, you want us out of business. And we turned around and said, yes, that would be our ideal solution. So we will be going to trial on that one. We'll be starting discovery soon. Freedom of Information Act, the government is playing games. They are going back and trying to say which department we should have sued, and also claiming, what are they claiming? They are claiming that they don't own the book either. They just rent it, so they don't have to give it to us, which to me goes even deeper into what the problems are. What are our chances of success? I think that's fascinating. The retailers I'm much more hopeful on because homeopathy is such a small part of their business that with any luck, we can convince them that we are more trouble than it is worth. We're not even asking them to stop selling it. We're asking them to put it in to a different section labeled homeopathy or to put it in with the supplements. Manufacturer, harder to say. Finally, where do we go? Well, what we're looking for overall, if I had to sum everything up in 2 words, we want informed consent on this. We want customers to understand and to be told the truth. So we're looking at the promoters of this, the celebrities who hawk such complete nonsense on this. We're trying to focus on children. Children don't make the choice of whether they take homeopathy. Their parents do. Similarly, we're looking at animals on this. There is a whole industry of veterinarian homeopathic science, which as a dog and cat lover, this makes me so angry. We're also looking at other supplements, other products, and there's one fantastic one I want to go after, which it's essences, and they claim in the ingredients that one of the ingredients is Reiki energy and another is full color spectrum. I don't even know how I'm going to test for these, but I'm going to work out a way of testing for them and then go ahead. I hope that has given you some idea of where we are, where we're going, and I would be very happy to take any questions now.
Hi, Nick. That was awesome. Thank you so much. It's always so informative listening to you. And thanks for just bringing so much information. So we do have some questions. I have to say my favorite new word, bullshittiest. Thank you so much. I'm going to be using that.
I realized that I wasn't certain it existed, but it damn well should do. So I'm going to use it now.
That was perfect. Thank you. So, I actually watched your arguments to the DC Court of Appeals several times. And in listening to some of the comments by the judges, it actually, I know you don't have the decision in this yet, but it actually sounded like at least 1 or 2 of the judges were really feeling your arguments and were not so much feeling the arguments coming from the opposing counsel. And this is the Walmart versus CVS case for those of you listening. And if you haven't seen the video of Nick's arguments to the DC Court of Appeals, strongly encourage you to check that out because it's really, really interesting. So what was your sense as to what the judges might be thinking?
Well, hi, Christina, if you're watching this, the opposing lawyer, I'm going to tell you what I think on this case, but I doubt she is. It's actually very odd. The Walmart's lawyer is an old friend of mine who I used to work with her at a previous law firm. So it's very good. I mean, this may come back to curse me, but I can't see any way we lost. We don't go back to discovery. There was a decision by the DC Supreme Court in between the ruling where we lost and the oral arguments, where the DC court decided that an animal rights charity could sue a food manufacturer for for claiming that they treated the animals that went into it well. We have a much closer nexus than they do on that. The argument that both Walmart and CVS made that really frustrated me, and that the judge somehow accepted, was that we are not a consumer protection organization. We just want to show that homeopathy is wrong on that. And homeopathy doesn't exist in a vacuum. We want to show it's wrong because it's hurting people. I can't see any way we don't win that. If that happens, we get into discovery, which is when we can start asking them really embarrassing questions like, how much money do you make off homeopathy? Why did you used to say on your website that this is nonsense and doesn't work, but you don't say that anymore? I think both the retailers will come to the table and we will get a settlement once we win this. That's my goal.
And so will that settlement go to CFI? If there is how does that work?
Actually, yes, a court can award. We'd certainly want them to award our legal fees in this, which just because it's in-house doesn't mean there's no fees. I mean, I put a lot of work in. Technically, the DC law can fine up to $1,500 for every violation, and we maintain every single sale of homeopathy over the last 3 years as an individual violation. I don't know what the court would do. I would love them. Of course, if I get a check for millions of dollars, I'm not going to be unhappy. But what we want, and this is what they're not used to facing. Generally, when plaintiffs sue, you can write them a check and they go away. That's not the case with us. We are insisting a real change. I don't know exactly what that change is, but it involves not putting arnica next to ibuprofen as if they're identical.
Right. It's interesting because I recall during the hearing that one of the opposing counsel said, well, nobody's ever complained about this. And I have to confess, I'm actually that person who has complained about it in person at the pharmacy multiple times, because when I have to go in to get, unfortunately now, if you want the good Sudafed with the really good active ingredient, you have to get it from behind the counter. And I go up to that counter, and right there on the counter at Walmart or at CVS, you find the homeopathic products. And I've looked right at the pharmacist and said, how can you endorse this? I mean, you understand this doesn't work.
And I feel terrible for the pharmacists. I'm not saying pharmacists are bad people. They know it's bullshit. They don't want it there. Every pharmacist I've spoken to about this has said, yeah, we kind of hope you win.
Mm-hmm. So we have a couple of questions. So interestingly, Bay Area Skeptics is asking, why doesn't the FDA at least put the disclaimer on homeopathic products, or is it on the products? And I think it isn't on the products right now.
The disclaimer I mentioned was the FTC, not the FDA. There is on the products this is not approved by the FDA for any purpose. People don't read those. And the person I'm suing for, if I have to name one person I'm suing for, it's the mother who picks up a kid from daycare and, has to run in to get some medicine for pink eye before going home and making sure the kid is fed and does the homework. Why doesn't the FDA do it? I don't know. Ask the FDA. I mean, if I had an answer to that question, I would be really happy. That should be clearer. The FTC, it doesn't even need to be on the product. The Canadians did this. God bless Quebec, which you've probably never heard an Englishman saying that. But they put hangers on the shelf with basically saying, this is bullshit, don't buy this, except in more legal terms than that. There are lots of ways they can do this. But yeah, I mean, why doesn't the FDA do it? They've got bigger fish to fry. They only have a limited number of people. And homeopathy makes the right people a lot of money, and it doesn't kill consumers most of the time. When I spoke to DC, because before you sue, you have to try to negotiate. So I spoke to the DC Department of Consumer Affairs, and a person said, listen, I got 3 people working for me here. I have to cover in drugs, fake cancer cures that are actually cyanide. Believe me, I agree with what you're doing, but the thing sold in CVS just doesn't reach that level for them.
So we're going to, they're asking me to wrap it up soon, so I'm going to toss one more question your direction. Have you found, actually, I'm going to go with this. This is from Linda Rosa, who says, what effect might the success of your case have on naturopaths whose most common prescription is homeopathic medicine?
These so far, we do a lot of work on naturopaths because they are frustrating as hell. Mostly what we do there is we're fighting defensively. We're trying to stop them being licensed in states on the same level as real doctors. These cases probably won't impact that because our theory is based on a consumer fraud notion that consumers don't know what they're taking. If you're going to a naturopath, you're kind of seeking things out more. I do want to take on that because I do think they don't adequately tell people. But it's a different concept to you walk into a retail store and over-the-counter stuff. Linda, this is such a huge area and there are so many people we want to go after. I'd love it. I'd love to go after these people and hey, write us a check and we'll hire another lawyer and maybe we can go after naturopaths next. But I hope so. I'll be honest with you. Don't expect a benefit from these cases in that area.
Nick Little, it has been so great having you here today. Thank you so much for coming out. And please keep fighting the good fight. We need you. You're a superhero. Awesome.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.